Hello, we're here today with Brendan Walsh, founder of ESG Risk Guard, speaking here with us today for GreenTech América Latina. And it's going to be a very interesting conversation because, hey, we're speaking about risks and regulations and what is happening in, the environment for climate change with regards to that. But firstly, let me ask Brendan a little bit to tell about his experience. I saw in your profile you are a global citizen, you have lived several places, you have studied in Edinburgh, in Harvard. So Brendan, with a lot of different areas you have already worked and as senior executive, and also different countries. Can you define yourself in one word?
Wow, in one word, I would say reliable.
That's very interesting as a warm-up. So let's speak with reliable Brendan. Brendan, I saw also that you are involved in climate science, and of course you lead ESG Risk Guard. So please tell me how it started and why that.
Sure. So I think you touched on it. Well, first of all, I'm delighted to be here to speak to the audience, Tiago. So thank you very much for the invitation. In terms of my background, you're correct. I have worked in London, in Hong Kong, in Sydney, New York, Paris, London, and then back to New York. Principally in the financial services arena, working initially in finance, strategic planning, CFO, and then on the general management track. Concurrently with that, I also worked as a board member for Ofgem, the energy regulator in the UK. And that was really the catalyst, if you like, for my interest in energy, renewable energy, and then leading to sustainability. So when I came back to the US, I was so interested in the topic, and I knew that ultimately I would start to work in that area. I wanted to get a really good foundation. So I did a master's in sustainability. And then a couple of years ago, I established my own business, the ESG Risk Guard. And my rationale for selecting that area was it really leveraged very strongly my commercial background, my risk background, and my interest in ESG and sustainability.
Interesting. And how do you see the environment now for the regulation and what is happening in terms of the financial institutions looking for, I would say learning, I would say also from this changing environment? What is happening in the ESG risk world?
So ESG as such covers environmental, social, and governance. It covers the whole spectrum of risks. I think it's fair to say that certainly within the E category, the environmental category, it really has been dominated by climate. And why is that? Because we're seeing, if you look at just this year alone, the number and the frequency and the intensity of extreme weather events has risen significantly. Now, this was predicted by the scientists, but it seems to be happening, even faster than what was initially thought. And all of this actually has been reinforced very recently in the IPCC report. IPCC is the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. They issued a report on August the 9th, which basically said that planet Earth is not necessarily in good shape if we continue with a lack of, action in terms of reducing GHGs, greenhouse gases. Then we could see a warming of the high 2s, 3, and even higher percent, which would be very, very bad for the planet. So this is really, not to be too hyperbolic about the situation, this is really the challenge of our time. This is essentially an existential threat to the planet. But to address your question, Tiago, in terms of what are financial institutions doing, well, essentially what's happened is the G7, the G20 leaders identified that the finance community as such were well placed to try and align the finance flows, to achieve the Paris Agreement of restricting temperature increases to 1.5%. And so consequently, what you've seen is lots of activity across the finance community. And by the finance community, I mean the regulators, the standard setters, the banks, the insurers, the asset owners, and the asset managers.
Yes, that's pretty interesting, and well, looks like it's very aligned with what we are starting to hear here in the region in Latin America. So, for example, last week, Brazilian Central Bank, as an example, released a notice about the inclusion of TCFD requirements for the financial institutions in the country. Can you explain a little bit what it is, TCFD, and how does it work, and the impacts for the financial industry?
Sure, of course. And I should say that I was delighted to see the Brazilian government taking that stance vis-a-vis TCFD, because many other governments have also done the same thing. And I believe there's more to come. So TCFD stands for the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosure. It was formed by the Financial Stability Board back in 2015, I believe, and they issued their final report in 2017, so just 4 years ago. And basically what TCFD is a framework to allow not only financial organizations, but companies and other organizations also. It provides them a framework to disclose what they believe to be their climate-related risks. And the way that TCFD sets that out is it basically assesses the institution's governance. So who's involved in the discussion and disclosure of climate-related risks? Is it at the board level? How often are the board advised or informed or consulted in this? Has there been a senior executive in the organization designated with responsibility for climate-related risks, and so on and so forth? And then the next pillar of TCFD is strategy. And that really looks at how the organization has reflected what they believe to be their climate-related risks within their strategy. And then the third pillar is risk management. That talks to how are climate-related risks reflected and managed as part of the overall risk management approach. Because as you're probably aware, risk management climate risk is really what they call a transverse risk. So it doesn't just impact credit risk or liquidity risk or market risk or reputational risk. It really transverses all of those risk categories. So that's risk management. And then the last pillar is what they call metrics and targets. So how is the organization monitoring their risks? How are they measuring them? How are they trying to improve their situation? So that, in a nutshell, is TCFD.
Yeah, it's very interesting, your comment, and also I think it resonates a lot with what we do in GreenTech América Latina. I always say, hey, a lot of those technologies, they are transversal. You know, they are in all areas because you can apply green technologies for solving problems in several places. And can you tell a little bit about your experience in terms of areas or maybe work you have done? Because, of course, a lot of things are changing and much probably you have good experience in terms of benefits. And also, of course, I would say even when you need to change something because of some assessment, you may look, I think, this in terms of, well, benefits for who is looking the subject, right? I think the change is not necessarily bad, can be very good.
Sure, sure. Actually, let me talk about a couple of things, Tiago, if that's okay. Let me talk about what we developed over the last couple of years. We developed both an ESG assessment, but given that your question relates to TCFD, we have developed TCFD assessments for banks, for insurers, for asset owners and asset managers, as well as for non-financial organizations. And that assessment essentially follows, in obviously more detail what I have just outlined in the previous response. But that is a very efficient way of an organization establishing where they are. And to bring that to life, what we have recently been engaged in is with a bank looking to obtain an assessment of one of their investments in another bank. So, i.e., engaging us to undertake an assessment of the investment, the bank's climate risk, and thereafter developing a robust framework that they could then utilize and roll out across their entire portfolio. So that's actually very interesting, very exciting. And it's, for me, very reassuring because it tells me that many of these financial institutions are very focused on establishing and getting clear line of sight as to precisely what risks they have in their portfolio, whether they be physical risks or transition risks. Transition risks are those being brought about with the transition to the reduced carbon economy.
Very, very interesting. Brendan, I'd like, I'm being called here because we are surpassing the limit of minutes we should talk here, and the conversation is good. I'd like to ask your final remarks now, and I think it's being very interesting in terms of being able to give information for people to be able to compare what to do. So I'd like to thank you very much for this interview, and also invite people from GreenTech América Latina network to look more information, because we're going to launch the interview with more information on the ebook of ESG Risk Guard. Brendan, please, I'd like your key messages now.
So thank you, Tiago. Once again, thank you for the opportunity to address your community. I thoroughly enjoyed it. As I said at the start, really delighted to see the Brazilian government, establishing TCFD as a requirement going forward. I believe actually that you will see that be rolled out essentially across the world, probably in the next 6 to 12 months. So I think people looking to get ahead of the curve here would be well placed to learn more about TCFD. I would be delighted to help financial institutions and non-financial institutions, even establishing a baseline for themselves so they can move forward and develop a roadmap. So thank you for the opportunity.
Yes, thank you very much, Brendan, for speaking today with us here for GreenTech América Latina Network. And well, we'll be pleased to receive you once here when things calm down for the COVID, etc. But I certainly know that the area you are working is an area that is key for what we are doing in terms of all the green technologies. And of course, very important for investor decision in terms of which technologies should I adopt, etc., which are the impacts. And so I think that people will be very interested to watch the interview. And we are going to direct all the comments and questions to you later on. Once again, I'd like to thank you very much for staying here and making the interview with us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.